The studio was silent as Maya Caldwell leaned in, her voice calm but cutting. "Tell me, Victoria, when did equity become the enemy of fairness?" The audience held their breath. Victoria Langston, usually quick-witted, blinked, speechless. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the rare moment when the host had no comeback. Hours earlier, Maya had entered this studio expecting a tough interview, but she never imagined they would go this far to break her. How did it come to this? And what would happen next? Before we begin, comment where you're watching from. If you believe in justice, hit like and subscribe for more powerful stories. Maya Caldwell had built her success on resilience, intelligence, and an unshakable belief that her work could change lives. As the CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, she had created a mentorship and business grant program that had empowered hundreds of young Black entrepreneurs to launch their dreams. It wasn't just about business. It was about building a legacy, breaking barriers, and proving that systemic obstacles could be dismantled with the right resources and support. So when she received an invitation to appear on Morning Forum, one of the most influential talk shows in the country, she saw it as an opportunity to amplify her mission to a national audience. But not everyone on her team saw it that way. Her assistant Jordan was the first to voice concerns. "Victoria Langston has a reputation," he said, crossing his arms as he paced the office. "She's not just controversial, she baits people, especially Black leaders. She's going to try and twist your words, make you look bad." Maya leaned back in her chair, unfazed. "Then I'll be ready." She had faced doubters before, had walked into rooms where people underestimated her, questioned her legitimacy, dismissed her as a token success story, rather than acknowledging her actual achievements. This would be no different. But what she didn't know was that the show's producers had already laid the groundwork for a setup far more insidious than she had anticipated. The first red flag came just a few days before the interview when an anonymous email landed in Jordan's inbox. It was a leaked internal message from one of Morning Forum's producers, referring to Maya's appearance as a golden opportunity to expose the so-called hypocrisy of race-focused business initiatives. The message suggested using pointed questions to highlight double standards, and even hinted at a last-minute fact-check designed to put Maya on the defensive. Jordan brought it to her immediately. "This isn't an interview," he said, placing his phone in front of her. "It's an ambush." Maya scanned the message, her jaw tightening slightly, but her resolve never wavered. Let them try. But the challenges began before she even stepped onto the set. The night before her flight to Los Angeles, her hotel reservation was inexplicably canceled. When Jordan called the hotel, they were given a vague excuse about overbooking, despite the fact that Maya's team had booked weeks in advance. After hours of scrambling, they secured another room at a different hotel across town, but it threw off their schedule, cutting into her final prep time. The next morning, while going through airport security, Maya was pulled aside for a random screening. She was made to wait while agents rifled through her luggage, questioning her about the amount of electronic equipment she was carrying. Nothing unusual for someone traveling for a high-profile media appearance. By the time she was cleared, she was dangerously close to missing her flight. As she hurried to her gate, she caught sight of a white businessman who had been standing behind her in line, walking through without a second glance from security. She arrived in Los Angeles exhausted but undeterred. The next morning, she was scheduled for a pre-interview meeting with the producers, but when she and Jordan arrived at the studio, they were made to wait in the lobby for over an hour. Other guests, who arrived after them, were ushered in immediately. When Jordan questioned a staff member, he received an apologetic but dismissive response about scheduling mix-ups. It was subtle, but Maya recognized the pattern. It was the same quiet, insidious dismissal she had faced so many times before. The way the world found small, almost unnoticeable ways to remind her that she wasn't supposed to be in certain spaces. Finally, she was led to a conference room where Victoria Langston herself was waiting. The host greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maya Caldwell," she said smoothly, extending a perfectly manicured hand. It's a pleasure to finally meet the woman rewriting the rules of entrepreneurship. Maya shook her hand firmly, meeting her gaze without hesitation. I appreciate the opportunity to share my work. Victoria gestured for her to sit, and for the next half hour, they went over the broad strokes of the interview. On the surface, it all seemed professional, but Maya could sense the undercurrents beneath Victoria's carefully crafted demeanor. The way she worded certain questions, the emphasis on controversy rather than impact. It was clear she had an agenda. The final warning sign came just before the interview was set to begin. A production assistant handed Maya an updated outline of the questions Victoria planned to ask. As she skimmed the list, her eyes narrowed. The topics had shifted significantly from what was discussed in the pre-interview. Instead of focusing on her mentorship program, the questions were now centered around race privilege and whether initiatives like hers were divisive. She looked up at Jordan, who had seen the change too. "They're trying to back me to a corner," she murmured. Jordan's expression was grim. "They're not just trying, they think they already have you beat." Maya had two options: walk away or step into the fire, but she had never been the type to back down. She handed the outline back to the assistant, smoothed her suit, and nodded. "Let's do this." As she stepped onto the set, the audience clapped politely, but there was an underlying tension in the room, an anticipation that came from knowing something controversial was about to unfold. Victoria was already seated, her signature smirk in place. "Maya Caldwell, ladies and gentlemen," she announced. "The self-made entrepreneur who says she's changing the game. But is she really leveling the playing field or just shifting the rules to favor one side?" The trap had been set, and Maya had just walked into it. Maya Caldwell sat poised in her chair, her hands resting lightly on her lap, but her mind was already racing. She had anticipated a tough interview, but the way Victoria Langston framed her opening statement set the tone for what was to come. "Maya Caldwell, ladies and gentlemen," Victoria said with a practiced smile, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "The self-made entrepreneur who says she's changing the game. But is she really leveling the playing field or just shifting the rules to favor one side?" The audience murmured, some clapping, others exchanging glances. Maya knew this wasn't just an introduction. It was a calculated move to frame her as someone whose success came at the expense of others. She exhaled slowly, forcing a calm smile. "Victoria, success isn't about shifting the rules. It's about ensuring that the game isn't rigged from the start." A few audience members clapped, but Victoria barely hesitated before launching into her first pointed question. "Your mentorship program focuses exclusively on Black entrepreneurs," she said, tilting her head in that feigned, curious way she was famous for. "Some would say that's exclusionary. Why not open it up to everyone?" Maya had expected this. It was a question she'd been asked many times before, by people who either didn't understand or didn't want to understand the necessity of targeted support for marginalized communities. She met Victoria's gaze without flinching. "It's not about exclusion," she said smoothly. "It's about addressing gaps that have existed for generations. If a house is on fire, you don't water the entire neighborhood. You start where the flames are." A few audience members murmured their agreement, and one even let out a "that's right" from the back. But Victoria wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming. "So you're saying that only Black entrepreneurs face challenges?" Maya's jaw tightened, but she refused to let the bait land. "I'm saying that systemic barriers exist, and pretending they don't won't make them go away." The exchange had been subtle, but Maya could already see where this was going. Victoria was twisting her words, reframing her mission as something divisive rather than necessary. Maya glanced toward the teleprompter, and that was when she saw it. The script had been changed. Her supposed responses were displayed in real time, but the words weren't hers. One sentence in particular stood out. "While racism exists, we must focus on unity instead of division." A cold realization hit her. This was a setup. They wanted to manipulate the footage, cut her responses in a way that made it seem like she was contradicting herself. She had seconds to decide what to do. She could react, call it out, but that would play into the narrative that she was defensive. Instead, she did something unexpected. She leaned into the silence, let it stretch just long enough to make people uncomfortable. Then she smiled. "Interesting," she said, tilting her head. "Did you just expect me to read what was put in front of me? Because I speak for myself, Victoria." The audience murmured again, catching on to what had just happened. Victoria's expression froze for a fraction of a second before she quickly recovered, but Maya saw the flicker of unease. Victoria pivoted, clearly realizing she needed to regain control. "Fair enough," she said with an easy laugh, as if the moment hadn't rattled her. "But let's talk about personal responsibility. Many successful entrepreneurs, regardless of race, have overcome obstacles. Isn't focusing so much on barriers just another way of making excuses?" The question landed heavily, and Maya could feel the energy in the room shift. Some audience members nodded, others crossed their arms. It was a classic move, minimizing systemic issues by pointing to individual success stories as proof that the playing field was already even. Maya took a slow breath. "Success despite barriers doesn't mean the barriers don't exist," she said, her voice steady. "If someone runs a race with weights on their ankles and still wins, that doesn't mean the weights weren't there. It just means they worked twice as hard." The audience erupted in applause this time, and even Victoria seemed momentarily at a loss for words. But she wasn't done yet. "So you believe that certain people have it harder than others?" she asked, her tone deceptively casual. "That seems divisive." Maya knew exactly what Victoria was doing, pushing the idea that acknowledging systemic issues somehow created them. But she wasn't going to let her control the narrative. "Acknowledging reality isn't divisive," Maya said firmly. "Ignoring is." The applause was louder this time, but Maya noticed something else. Victoria's eyes flicked toward the producers behind the cameras. It was subtle, but it told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just about the conversation. They had something else planned. The next moment, the screen behind them lit up, displaying a headline Maya had never seen before. "Breaking: Caldwell Foundation under scrutiny for unfair grant distribution." Maya's stomach clenched. This was orchestrated. She turned back to Victoria, who was watching her reaction carefully. "Maya, how do you respond to claims that your foundation unfairly prioritizes Black entrepreneurs over others, effectively shutting out other struggling business owners?" The audience gasped. This was the real attack. Maya forced herself to remain calm. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice unwavering. "Our grants go to those who have historically been denied access to funding. Leveling the playing field isn't about shutting others out. It's about making sure everyone has a fair shot." But Victoria wasn't finished. "Then why are people saying your program is discriminatory?" she pressed, her tone sharpening. "Isn't it possible that in trying to address inequality, you've simply created another form of it?" This was it, the moment they had been trying to push her into. If she got angry, they'd paint her as aggressive. If she backed down, they'd say she had no defense. But Maya wasn't playing by their rules. She turned to the audience. "Let me ask you all something," she said. "If a school sees that one group of students is falling behind and they offer tutoring to help them catch up, is that unfair? Or is it simply the right thing to do?" A few people in the audience nodded, murmuring their agreement. Maya turned back to Victoria. "This isn't about exclusion. It's about fixing the gaps that have been ignored for too long." For the first time, Victoria hesitated. The audience wasn't entirely on her side anymore. Maya could see it, the shifting energy, the way people were reconsidering the narrative they'd been fed. But Victoria wasn't about to let go so easily. "That's a nice analogy," she said, her smile tight. "But some would argue that real success comes from overcoming adversity without special treatment. What do you say to those who believe programs like yours create dependency?" Maya let out a slow breath. She had heard this argument 1,000 times before, and it never got less exhausting. "I say that resources aren't a crutch, they're a launch pad. she said simply. Banks give loans, investors fund startups. No one calls that dependency. So why is it only a problem when it's black entrepreneurs getting a fair shot? The audience clapped again, louder this time, and Maya saw it, the small flicker of frustration in Victoria's eyes. The game had changed. Maya wasn't just defending herself, she was taking control of the conversation. But Victoria had one more card to play. One last question, Maya, she said, leaning forward, her voice deceptively casual. If racism is such a big barrier, how did you make it? The room went silent. It was the final trap, the argument that every black success story faced. If one person overcame the odds, why couldn't everyone else? Maya's expression didn't change. She knew what Victoria wanted, to force her into an impossible contradiction. But Maya wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. She leaned forward, meeting Victoria's gaze. Success despite racism doesn't mean racism doesn't exist, she said quietly. It just means I refuse to let it stop me. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? The audience erupted. Victoria's smile faltered, and for the first time, she had no immediate response. The producers scrambled, the cameras stayed locked on Maya, and the energy in the room had shifted completely. But the real question was, how far would Victoria go to regain control? Comment number 1 if you agree that Maya handled this interview with grace, or if you think Victoria was out of line. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to like and subscribe. But the question remains, how far will they go to silence Maya? Stay tuned. Victoria Langston's smile was tight, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for a lifeline. The energy in the studio had shifted, and she knew it. The audience had begun to lean toward Maya, murmuring their approval at her sharp, measured responses. But Victoria wasn't done yet. She had one goal: to regain control. Her voice, syrupy smooth, cut through the applause as she leaned back into her chair, feigning casual curiosity. Well, Maya, that's quite the statement, she said, crossing her legs. But let's dig a little deeper. You talk about barriers, but let's talk about responsibility. After all, isn't personal accountability just as important as opportunity? The question was a classic redirection, subtly implying that the struggles Maya addressed could be solved if people simply tried harder. The audience quieted, waiting for her response. Maya didn't blink. Personal accountability matters, she said, her tone steady. But accountability without opportunity is just another way to blame people for circumstances beyond their control. We can't ignore the systemic issues that create these challenges in the first place. The audience clapped again, but Victoria barely acknowledged it. She was already moving on. And yet, Victoria continued, tilting her head. There are those who argue that focusing so much on race in business creates division, that in trying to fix past injustices, you're actually creating new ones. Wouldn't true equality mean treating everyone the same? The audience murmured, sensing the weight of the question. It was a carefully disguised attack, the same argument that had been used for decades to dismiss initiatives aimed at leveling the playing field. Maya exhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral. Treating everyone the same assumes that everyone started from the same place, she said. But if one person is given a head start and another is forced to start miles behind, pretending the race was fair doesn't make it so. A wave of applause rippled through the audience, louder this time, and Maya saw it, the flicker of irritation in Victoria's eyes. But the host wasn't finished. She had been waiting for this moment. A large screen behind them suddenly flickered to life, displaying a news headline Maya hadn't seen before. Caldwell Foundation under scrutiny for unfair grant distribution. Maya's stomach tightened. She had anticipated an attack, but not this. A murmur spread through the audience as Victoria's expression turned sympathetic, almost condescending. Maya, I hate to bring this up, she said, feigning concern, but it seems your foundation is facing some controversy. Reports suggest that some applicants felt unfairly excluded. What do you say to those who claim your organization discriminates in the name of inclusion? Maya felt Jordan shift in his seat behind the cameras. This was planned. The article was meant to catch her off guard, to frame her as the very thing Victoria had been pushing toward all along, a hypocrite. But Maya was prepared. She took a slow breath, composing herself before she spoke. "I'd say that this isn't new," she said, her voice measured. "Every time a program is created to address inequity, someone will claim they were left out. But let's be clear, focusing on those who have historically been denied access isn't exclusion. It's correction." Victoria's smirk widened slightly. "So you're saying that in order to be fair, you have to be unfair?" The question was a trap, meant to corner her into admitting bias, but Maya wasn't playing that game. "I'm saying that fairness isn't about treating everyone identically. It's about ensuring that everyone has the same opportunities," she said. "And right now, those opportunities are not equally distributed." Another wave of applause, stronger. This time, Maya could feel it, the tide was turning, but Victoria wasn't done yet. The screen changed again, this time displaying a blurred document. "Well," Victoria said, her voice light but pointed, "according to a leaked report, some of your foundation's grant recipients were allegedly pre-selected before the official review process even began. If true, wouldn't that suggest favoritism?" Maya's pulse quickened. This was a blatant attempt to discredit her work. She had seen this tactic before, twisting half-truths into full-blown accusations. She leaned forward, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "If there's a legitimate concern, I encourage a full review," she said, her voice unwavering. "Because unlike some, I don't fear transparency," the audience erupted. Victoria's smirk twitched, faltering for the briefest moment before she quickly recovered. But before she could regain control, something unexpected happened. A voice from the audience spoke up. "That's not what's happening, and we all know it." A young woman stood up, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. The cameras swung toward her. Maya's breath caught. She recognized her. Alana Rivers, one of the entrepreneurs Maya's foundation had supported. Alana turned toward Victoria, her gaze unwavering. "I was one of the applicants for the Caldwell Foundation's grant," she said. "And I got it. Not because I was handed anything, but because I had a solid business plan and no other doors were open to me. People like me don't get these chances. If this program didn't exist, I wouldn't be standing here today." A murmur spread through the audience. Victoria's jaw tightened. Maya turned back to Victoria, her voice calm but firm. "That's the reality," she said. "Not everyone starts with access to capital, connections, or even the benefit of the doubt. That's why these programs exist. Not to exclude, but to ensure that everyone has the chance to succeed." Victoria was losing ground, and she knew. "I appreciate your passion, Maya," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "But at the end of the day, don't you think we should be striving for a world where we don't need race-specific programs at all?" Maya tilted her head, studying her. "That would be great," she said. "The day race is no longer a barrier. I'll happily shut my program down. But until that day comes, I refuse to ignore reality just because it makes some people uncomfortable." The waste audience clapped, some even standing. Victoria's polished mask was slipping. She knew she was losing control of the narrative. But instead of backing down, she did something Maya hadn't expected. She doubled down. "Let's talk about money," she said, shifting tactics. "You've built a successful company. You have influence. Wouldn't it be more impactful if you just invested in existing businesses rather than creating separate programs? Some might say that choosing to fund only Black entrepreneurs creates a perception that you don't believe in unity." Maya saw what she was doing, framing her success as proof that individual effort alone was enough, dismissing the need for systemic change. But Maya had spent too long in this fight to be thrown off now. "I invest in existing businesses," she said. "I also create new ones. And the idea that supporting Black entrepreneurs somehow takes away from others is a false narrative. When Black businesses succeed, communities succeed. This isn't about division. It's about expansion." Victoria's smile was strained. Now, she knew she had lost the room, but she still had one final move left. She turned back to the screen, and a new headline appeared. Critics question Caldwell's commitment to equality. The words were vague but damning. "So, Maya," Victoria said, her voice carrying the weight of one last attempt at control, "do you think that by prioritizing race in your programs, you're actually making things worse?" Maya let the silence stretch for a moment, then leaned forward. "Tell me, Victoria," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "When did equity become the enemy of fairness?" The audience froze. It was the same question she had asked at the beginning of the interview, but now, after everything that had been exposed, it hit differently. The cameras zoomed in on Victoria, capturing the exact moment she realized she had no answer. For the first time, she hesitated, and in that hesitation, the truth was clear. Maya had won this round, but she knew Victoria wasn't the type to go down without a fight, and the real battle was just beginning. The studio was electric with tension, the weight of Maya's words still hanging in the air. Victoria Langston sat frozen, her carefully crafted confidence slipping for just a fraction of a second as she realized she had no immediate response. The audience murmured, sensing the shift in power, and Maya knew she had landed a critical blow. But Victoria wasn't done, not yet. Her pride wouldn't allow her to concede defeat so easily. She exhaled sharply, her lips curling into a tight smile as she straightened in her chair, regaining her composure. "That's a clever way to frame it, Maya," she said, her voice deceptively smooth. "But let's be honest. If programs like yours were truly about fairness, they wouldn't need to be race-specific. Some might say that by making race the focus, you're actually encouraging division rather than bridging gaps. Isn't that just another form of segregation?" The audience gasped at the sheer audacity of the question. Some murmured in disapproval, others exchanged shocked glances. But Victoria kept her smirk in place, her eyes watching Maya like a predator waiting for its prey to make a fatal mistake. Maya didn't flinch. She had heard this argument before, phrased in different ways, always with the same intention: to shift the blame from systemic issues onto those trying to address them. She let a moment of silence stretch between them before leaning in slightly. "Victoria," she said calmly, "segregation was about exclusion. It was about barring people from opportunities based on race. What I'm doing is the opposite. I'm opening doors that were slammed shut for generations. The only people who call that divisive are the ones who benefited from those doors being closed in the first place." The audience erupted into applause, louder this time, with some even standing. Maya saw the flicker of irritation cross Victoria's face before she quickly masked it, but it was too late. The crowd had picked up on it. Victoria adjusted in her seat, gripping the armrests just a little tighter before flashing another saccharine smile. "Well," she said, her voice clipped but still controlled, "some might argue that success isn't about looking at the past, but moving forward. Wouldn't it be more productive to focus on uniting people rather than constantly bringing up race?" The question was a last-ditch effort, an attempt to paint Maya as someone fixated on race rather than progress. But Maya was ready. She met Victoria's gaze steadily, her voice unwavering. "Unity sounds great," she said, "but it's hard to build a bridge when you refuse to acknowledge the river you're trying to cross. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. It just leaves people stranded on opposite shores." Another round of applause rippled through the audience, and this time, even some of the studio crew behind the cameras nodded in agreement. Victoria's mask was slipping. She knew it. The audience knew it. Maya could see the way her fingers tightened against her cue cards, her eyes darting briefly toward the producers. There was desperation in that glance, a silent plea for backup, for something, anything, to help her regain control of the narrative. And then, just as Maya suspected, the real trap was sprung. The screen behind them flickered again, revealing a new headline: "Breaking Allegations Surface Against Caldwell Foundation's Hiring Practices." The murmurs in the crowd turned into outright gasps. Maya felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her face neutral. She turned to the screen, reading the subheading carefully. The claim was vague: Something about unverified complaints and claims of preferential treatment, but the damage was done. The suggestion alone was enough to make some people question everything. Victoria pounced on the moment like a vulture spotting fresh prey. "Maya," she said, her voice laced with false concern, "I have to ask. These allegations suggest that your company may not be as inclusive as you claim. Some say that your hiring practices disproportionately favor black candidates. How do you respond to those who feel excluded by your efforts?" Maya exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. This was such a predictable move. Take a program designed to correct systemic inequality and twist it into something sinister. She turned back to Victoria, her voice steady. "Let me ask you something," she said. "When companies historically hired only white employees for decades, where was this concern for fairness? When banks refused loans to black entrepreneurs, when investors ignored their pitches, where was this outrage?" The audience clapped again, and Maya pressed forward. "The truth is, the playing field has never been level. And when we take steps to fix that, people like you suddenly start talking about fairness." Victoria opened her mouth, but Maya wasn't done. "And let's be real. If my company were prioritizing white candidates, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." The audience roared in approval. For the first time in her career, Victoria looked genuinely rattled. She shifted in her chair, forcing a smile that no longer looked effortless. She knew she was losing, and worse, she knew the cameras were capturing every moment of it. But she had one last play. She straightened up, pressing her lips together. Before speaking, "I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on some of this," she said smoothly, trying to pivot. "But let's talk numbers. You've been incredibly successful, Maya. Do you think your personal success is proof that barriers don't exist the way you claim they do?" Maya's lips parted slightly, caught off guard, not by the question itself, but by the sheer absurdity of it. She glanced at the audience, many of whom looked equally baffled, before turning back to Victoria. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice carrying a quiet intensity. "Because I made it, that means the system isn't flawed?" Victoria nodded, her smile returning slightly. Maya chuckled, shaking her head. "Success despite racism doesn't mean racism doesn't exist," she said. "It just means I refuse to let it break me. And that terrifies you, doesn't it?" The audience exploded. Some people stood clapping and cheering while others murmured in awe. Victoria's face twitched, but she quickly forced another tight smile. "Well, Maya," she said, her voice slightly strained, "you certainly have strong opinions." Maya leaned forward slightly, her expression calm but piercing. "They're not opinions," she said, "they're facts. And the fact that you're uncomfortable with them doesn't make them any less true." Another round of applause erupted, this time completely overtaking the studio. Victoria's control over the interview was gone. The producers scrambled behind the cameras, some whispering into headsets, others frantically gesturing, but there was nothing they could do to salvage it now. Maya had turned their own game against them, and everyone knew it. For a moment, Victoria just sat there, blinking. Then realizing she had no graceful way out, she forced another laugh. "Well, Maya," she said, gripping the edge of her chair, "I think we're out of time." Maya smiled. How convenient. The producers cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. The audience was still buzzing, some standing and talking amongst themselves, others pulling out their phones. Maya could hear the whispers. People were already posting clips, already sharing what had just happened in real time. As she stood to leave, Jordan met her at the edge of the stage, his eyes wide with barely contained excitement. "You just took down Victoria Langston on her own show," he whispered. Maya smirked. "And we're just getting started." But the question remained, how would the world react once the clips went viral? And more importantly, how far would those in power go to try and silence her now? Comment number 1 if you think Maya handled that interview with grace and power, or do you think Victoria went too far? Let us know your thoughts below, and if you believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to like and subscribe. But the real question is, How will the world respond to this explosive interview? Stay tuned. The minutes after the broadcast were a blur. Maya Caldwell could feel the hum of the studio as the cameras turned off, the sound of the crew packing up, and the whispers that started almost immediately. She stood up, straightening her suit, trying to maintain the composure that had carried her through the most intense interview of her career. Jordan stood next to her, his eyes wide, still processing everything that had just unfolded. Maya hadn't expected to win the battle with Victoria, Langston so decisively, but as she looked around the studio, she knew this wasn't over. The hardest part of this fight was about to begin, and the world would soon witness the full scale of what they had tried to do to her. As she exited the set, a sense of cold certainty settled in her stomach. She had exposed the cracks in Victoria's carefully constructed persona, and she had shown the world just how far people would go to silence those who were challenging the status quo. But there was more. There was always more. She knew that, in their desperation, her detractors would spin this entire interview, twist her words, and manipulate the narrative to paint her as the villain. She had seen it before. People like her were never allowed to have the last word. But she wasn't just anyone. Maya Caldwell had worked too hard to let this moment slip through her fingers. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket as she walked through the corridors of the studio. At first she ignored it, but Jordan's worried glance made her pull it out. Her notifications were flooding in, text messages, emails, social media posts, and news alerts, all buzzing with the same theme. The interview was already going viral. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she glanced at the stream of messages from her supporters. Her phone was blowing up with praise, with people tagging her, sharing her quotes, and celebrating the way she had shut down Victoria. She could almost hear the collective cheer from the people who had watched her fight back. But then there were the other messages, the ones that made her pulse race with anxiety. Criticism, outrage, accusations, people calling her divisive, angry, and even racist. Headlines calling her the angry black woman who was too focused on race to see the bigger picture. It was happening already, just like she had predicted. She was being vilified for telling the truth, for standing her ground. But this wasn't just about her. This was about the people she represented, the entrepreneurs she fought for every day, the women who had been silenced and ignored for far too long. Her assistant, Sarah, met her just outside the elevator. "Maya, the press wants an exclusive," she said urgently. "But we have to act fast. There's a storm brewing, and I think we need to prepare for what's coming." Maya nodded, the weight of it all settling on her shoulders. "I know," she said softly, "but we're not backing down. If they want to try to take me down, they're going to have to work harder than that." As they made their way to the conference room, the phone in her hand buzzed again, a message from her lawyer. She opened it quickly. "Maya, there are some things we need to address. A story is about to drop. Someone from your team is leaking sensitive information. We've got a problem." Her blood ran cold. She had been expecting a media backlash, but this was different. A leak. It didn't take long to figure out who was behind it. A former colleague, someone who had been disgruntled with her leadership style, had made a deal with a rival network to feed them false information about Maya's foundation. They had fabricated claims of financial mismanagement, misappropriation of funds, and favoritism in the grant distribution process. The timing was no accident. The story was set to break within hours. They were coming for her, and they were going to try to destroy everything she had built. Maya took a deep breath, pushing down the anger that threatened to bubble over. "I want a full investigation," she said to Sarah, her voice calm but steely. "I want to know who's behind this, and I want them held accountable. They can't use us as pawns in their game." At the same time, Maya knew she couldn't afford to wait for an investigation to unfold. The narrative was already spinning out of control, and she needed to take charge of the story before it completely slipped away from her. She looked at Jordan, who was already dialing the media contacts they had built over the years. "I need a statement ready," she said firmly. "We're going public with this. The truth is the only thing that can stop this now." Hours later, Maya stood at a press conference, her back straight, her shoulders squared. She had never felt more ready for a fight. The cameras flashed as she walked to the podium, and she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass. She looked tired. There was no denying that. But she also looked resolute, like someone who had lived through the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. She cleared her throat before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, "I'm here today not to explain myself, but to set the record straight. There are people who will try to tear down what we've built. They will lie. They will manipulate. But I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to defend the people who need us. The entrepreneurs who have no voice, the young women who have no opportunity, the communities who are constantly told that they don't matter." She paused, letting her words sink in. "There's a story being circulated right now about me, about my foundation, and it's a lie. The leak you've heard about isn't the truth. It's a smear campaign designed to take down everything we've worked for. But here's the thing, the truth always comes out, and I'm here to make sure that the truth is what you hear." Maya's voice was steady as she explained the steps she was taking to address the allegations, and she promised that every accusation would be thoroughly investigated. But she didn't stop there. "These attacks on my character, on my work, are not about me. They are about fear, fear of change, fear of the power that people like me, people who have been denied opportunity for so long, now have to make their voices heard, and I'm not going to back down." She finished her statement with a final defiant note. "This isn't just about me. This is about every single person who has ever been told that they're not good enough, that their dreams are too big, that they don't belong in rooms like this. I'm here to tell you that those days are over. We are here to stay. We will fight, and we will win." As Maya left the podium, she could feel the energy in the room change. The press had come to attack, but now they were asking different questions. They were no longer just interested in the scandal. They were interested in the truth. The story had shifted, but Maya knew this was just the beginning. She had taken the first step in reclaiming her narrative, but the fight was far from over. As she walked back to her office, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from her lawyer. "The leak is just the beginning. There's more coming." Maya looked out the window, the weight of everything resting on her shoulders. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be more attacks, more challenges, and more attempts to undermine her. But she also knew one thing for certain: the fight for justice, for opportunity, for equity had only just begun. How much further will Maya go to protect everything she's worked for? And who is behind these attacks trying to destroy her? Stay tuned. The truth is just beginning to unfold. The days following the interview were a storm unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. The media frenzy was relentless, each outlet spinning their own version of events, some hailing her as a hero for speaking truth to power, others painting her as a divisive figure whose success had come at the cost of unity. But it wasn't just public opinion that Maya had to contend with. Behind the scenes, the real battle was taking shape. The allegations against her foundation, the calculated leaks, the sudden scrutiny over her business practices, it was all part of something bigger, something designed to dismantle everything she had built. And Maya was determined to find out who was behind it. Her legal team worked around the clock, tracing the source of the leak, gathering evidence, and preparing a full-scale defense. But it was Jordan who uncovered the most damning piece of information. Late one night, he burst into Maya's office, his face pale, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. "Maya," he said, his voice urgent, "you need to see this." He placed his phone on the desk, pressing play on a video that had just surfaced. Online, the grainy footage showed a private meeting. Victoria Langston sitting across from a group of executives, her voice unmistakable. "The goal isn't just to discredit her," Victoria was saying. "We need to make sure she's too toxic to continue. If we play this right, her sponsors will pull out, her investors will run, and she'll be finished before she even knows what hit her." Maya stared at the screen, her pulse pounding. This wasn't just a media attack. This was a coordinated effort to destroy her. And now she had proof. Jordan watched her carefully. "This was leaked by someone inside the network," he said. "I don't know who, but it doesn't matter. We have them, Maya. We have everything we need." Maya took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "We go public," she said finally. "If they want a war, we'll give them one." The next morning, Maya held a press conference. The room was packed, journalists filling every seat, cameras flashing as she took the podium. She knew the world was watching. "I stand before you today not as a victim, but as someone who refuses to be silenced," she began. "For the past week, I have been the target of a coordinated attack designed to discredit my work, my integrity, and my very right to exist in these spaces. And now I have proof." She gestured to the large screen behind her, where the leaked video played for the entire world to see. Gasps rippled through the crowd, journalists scrambling to take notes, cameras zooming in to capture every detail. Maya turned back to the audience. "This is not just about me. This is about every Black entrepreneur, every woman of color who has been told that they are too loud, too ambitious, too disruptive. This is about the forces that will do everything in their power to keep us from rising. But let me be clear, I am not going anywhere." The fallout was immediate. The video spread like wildfire across social media. News anchors dissecting every frame, political analysts weighing in on the implications. Victoria Langston and her network scrambled to contain the damage, issuing carefully worded statements, claiming the footage was taken out of context. But the public wasn't buying it. Sponsors began pulling their funding from Morning Forum, advertisers distancing themselves from the controversy. Within days, Victoria was suspended from the network, pending a full investigation. Maya, however, wasn't finished. She knew taking down Victoria was only part of the battle. The deeper issue, the system that allowed people like Victoria to thrive while silencing voices like Maya's, was still intact. So she used the moment to go further, launching an even bigger initiative, securing funding from new investors who admired her resilience, creating more opportunities for marginalized entrepreneurs than ever before. But the final twist came when an unexpected figure stepped forward. A former producer from Morning Forum reached out to Maya's team, offering a behind-the-scenes look at how the show had deliberately targeted guests like her for ambush-style interviews. The producer provided emails, scripts, even video footage of meetings where tactics were discussed in detail. Armed with this new evidence, Maya took action, not just against Victoria, but against the entire system that had allowed these tactics to flourish. Weeks later, as she sat in her office watching the news reports roll in, she felt a sense of finality wash over her. Victoria Langston had officially been fired, her reputation in shambles. The network had issued a public apology, promising reform. And Maya, she was stronger than ever. She had faced the storm, walked through the fire, and emerged not just intact but victorious. She glanced at her phone, where messages from supporters continued to pour in. Young entrepreneurs thanking her for standing up, for proving that power could be challenged, that justice could be served. She smiled to herself, knowing this was never just about her. It was about something bigger, something unstoppable. And as she looked out the window, watching the city buzz with life below her, she knew this was just the beginning. The battle had been won, but the war for change was far from over. And Maya Caldwell? She was ready for whatever came next. Maya Caldwell sat in the quiet of her office, her fingers tracing the rim of a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. The city outside was alive with movement, but inside, everything was still. It had been days since the final blow landed. Victoria Langston had been officially removed from Morning Forum, the network had issued its public apology, and the headlines that once attempted to destroy her now sang a different tune. But Maya wasn't basking in the victory. She was already looking ahead, already thinking about what came next. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her, the screen lighting up with an influx of messages. Supporters, allies, people she hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly reaching out to tell her how proud they were. But it was one message in particular that caught her attention. It was from a young woman named Aaliyah, a participant in her foundation's mentorship program. Maya hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Miss Caldwell, I just wanted to say thank you. I watched your interview. I watched everything that happened after. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I can take up space in rooms that weren't built for me. Because you did. Because you wouldn't let them silence you. Thank you for showing me that my voice matters." Maya closed her eyes, letting the words settle deep inside her. This was why she fought. This was why she had never backed down. Not for herself, but for the ones watching, the ones waiting to see if the world would ever make space for them. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Jordan stepped inside, a knowing look on his face. "They want you back," he said simply, placing a folder on her desk. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Jordan smirked. "The networks. The ones who thought they could take you down, they're all scrambling now. They want exclusives, they want features, they want to spin this into a redemption arc for themselves." Maya leaned back in her chair, amused but not surprised. She had seen it happen before, the way power recoiled when challenged, only to try and repackage its failure as a new opportunity. "And what do you think I should do?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Jordan grinned. "Make them come to you on your terms." Maya glanced at the folder, flipping it open to skim. Through the offers, it was tempting. It would be easy to take the spotlight, to cement herself as the face of this victory. But that had never been her goal. She wasn't interested in redemption stories crafted by networks that had been complicit in trying to tear her down. She was interested in something real, something lasting. She pushed the folder aside. "I have a better idea," she said. 2 weeks later, she stood in front of a packed auditorium, the energy in the room electric. It wasn't a network event. It wasn't a media spectacle. It was something more. Entrepreneurs, activists, community, leaders, all gathered together, not just to celebrate Maya's victory, but to build on it. She took the stage, gripping the microphone with steady hands, and for the first time in a long time, she spoke freely. "They thought this was about me," she said, her voice strong. "They thought taking me down would stop the movement. But they were wrong. Because this has never been about one person. This is about all of us. It's about every person who has been told that they don't belong, that they should shrink themselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for them. But I'm here to tell you, we are done asking for permission." The audience erupted into applause, voices cheering, hands clapping, a collective force rising to meet the moment. Maya smiled, letting the sound wash over her. She had spent years fighting for a seat at the table. But now, she was building a new one. The world had tried to silence her, and now the world was listening, and this was just the beginning. Maya Caldwell's story is a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice. She walked into a space designed to discredit her, faced an opponent determined to break her, and emerged stronger than ever. Her journey reminds us that speaking truth to power is never easy, especially when the systems in place are built to silence those who challenge them. But as Maya proved, the truth has a way of cutting through the noise. It cannot be suppressed forever. This story also exposes a harsh reality. When marginalized voices rise, they are often met with resistance. Maya was not attacked because she was wrong. She was attacked because she was right, and that terrified those who benefit from the status quo. But instead of backing down, she used their attacks against them, turning what was meant to be her downfall into a movement even bigger than herself. The lesson here is clear. Power concedes nothing without a fight. If you believe in something, if you are working to create change, there will always be those who try to stop you. But as Maya showed, their resistance is proof that you are shaking the foundation of something that was never meant to be fair. And when that happens, you have two choices. Let them silence you or make them hear you louder than ever. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think about Maya's journey? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to stand your ground, Against injustice? Comment below and let us know your thoughts. If you believe in standing up for truth and equality, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters and your story has the power to change the world. See you in the next one.